The mysterious repair job. Jake Torres wiped the grease from his hands with a worn cloth, the familiar smell of engine coolant and metal polish filling his nostrils. At 19, he had already earned a reputation as the best mechanic on Haven's Rest, the massive space station that served as a trading hub on the outer rim of human territory. His small repair bay, tucked away in the station's lower levels, was cluttered with spare parts, diagnostic equipment, and half-finished projects that most mechanics would have given up on years ago. The young man stretched his aching back and glanced at the chronometer on his workbench. Another 16-hour shift was coming to an end, and he still hadn't made enough credits to cover this month's rent. The larger repair corporations were squeezing out independent operators like him, offering cheaper services with inferior results. Jake's work was better, but quality didn't always win over price in the competitive world of space commerce. A soft chime from his workshop's entrance made him look up. The blast door slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing a figure draped in a dark environmental cloak. The visitor's face was hidden beneath a deep hood, and their movements carried an odd, almost predatory grace. Jake had seen all kinds of beings pass through Haven's Rest, humans from the inner colonies, Martian settlers, even the occasional trader from the disputed zones, but something about this client made his skin crawl. "You are Jake Torres, the mechanic," the figure said. It wasn't a question. The voice was strange, carrying undertones that seemed to resonate in frequencies just beyond human hearing. "I have heard of your ... capabilities." Jake set down his tools and straightened. "Depends what you need fixed. I work on all standard propulsion systems, life support units, and most navigation arrays. Can't do military-grade encryption locks or anything that might get me in trouble with station security." The cloaked figure stepped deeper into the workshop, seeming to glide rather than walk. "What I require is ... unique. The compensation would be substantial. 50,000 credits for a single repair job." Jake's eyes widened. 50,000 credits was more than he usually made in a year. It was enough to pay off his debts, upgrade his equipment, maybe even buy his own ship and leave the station behind. But nothing legitimate paid that well, especially not for a young mechanic with no formal certification. "What's the catch?" Jake asked, crossing his arms. 50,000 credits doesn't come without strings attached. What exactly am I fixing, and why can't you take it to one of the corporate bays? The figure reached into the folds of its cloak and produced a small holographic projector. With a soft click, it activated, displaying the three-dimensional image of an engine unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The design was elegant and alien, with crystalline components that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The power coupling systems followed no human engineering principles, and the fuel injection ports were arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "This is a propulsion unit from my ship," the figure explained. "It was damaged during a navigation error. The repair must be completed in absolute secrecy, away from the prying eyes of station authorities. You have the reputation for discretion as well as skill." Jake studied the hologram, his mechanical mind already analyzing the unusual design. Despite its alien origin, he could see similarities to human technology. The basic principles of thrust generation, energy containment, and structural integrity were universal constants. But there were components he didn't recognize, materials that shouldn't exist according to current scientific understanding. "I've never worked on anything like this before," Jake admitted. "I can't guarantee I won't make things worse. And if this is stolen property or something illegal... It is neither stolen nor illegal by any human law," the figure interrupted. and your reputation suggests you are capable of adapting to unfamiliar technology. The payment will be transferred to your account immediately upon completion. Half now, half when finished. Jake's personal communicator chimed as 25,000 credits appeared in his account balance. He stared at the number, his practical side warring with his instincts. The money would solve all his problems, but nothing about this situation felt right. Still, his curiosity was stronger than his caution. The engine design was fascinating, unlike anything in the databases he had access to. "All right," Jake said finally. "I'll take a look, but I reserve the right to stop if I think I'm going to damage it beyond repair. When can you bring it in?" "It is already here," the figure replied, gesturing toward the workshop's cargo entrance. "My associates will deliver it within the hour. Work quickly. I need the repairs completed by tomorrow's end cycle." Before Jake could ask any more questions, the cloaked figure turned and glided out of his workshop, leaving him alone with more questions than answers. He spent the next hour clearing space and gathering his tools, trying to prepare for a job, unlike any he had taken before. When the engine arrived, Jake's breath caught in his throat. The hologram had not done justice to the actual device. It stood nearly 3 meters tall and was composed of materials that seemed to shift and flow, like liquid metal while maintaining their solid form. Crystalline chambers pulsed with a soft blue light, and the entire assembly hummed with barely contained energy even in its damaged state. Jake circled the engine slowly, running his scanner over its surface and taking detailed readings. The power signature was unlike anything in his experience. The energy patterns suggested this device was capable of output levels that should have required a small star to sustain. The damaged sections were immediately obvious. Several of the crystalline chambers had been shattered. Their contents leaked away, and the main power coupling had been twisted nearly in half as he began his work. Jake found himself falling into the familiar rhythm of diagnosis and repair. Despite its alien origin, the engine responded to his touch like any other machine. He carefully removed the damaged crystals. Noting their unusual properties, they seemed to exist in a state of quantum superposition, simultaneously solid and energy. The replacement components provided by his mysterious client fit perfectly, as if they had been manufactured specifically for this repair. Hours passed as Jake worked, his concentration so complete that he lost track of time. The complex internal mechanisms of the engine revealed themselves layer by layer, each discovery more fascinating than the last. This wasn't just advanced technology, it was revolutionary, representing breakthroughs in physics that human science was still decades away from achieving. As he reached for a particularly delicate component deep within the engine's core, Jake's hand slipped on a sharp edge. He cursed as a deep cut opened across his palm, blood welling up and dripping onto the crystalline surface below. The moment his blood made contact with the alien metal, everything changed. The engine roared to life, with a sound that bypassed his ears and resonated directly in his bones. Light exploded from every crystal chamber, bathing the workshop in brilliant blue radiance. Jake stumbled backward, clutching his bleeding hand, as holographic displays materialized in the air around him. But these weren't diagnostic readouts or technical specifications. They were images, memories, scenes from a life he had never lived. He saw himself, but older, working in a laboratory filled with impossible machines. His older self wore the uniform of a research director, his hair gray at the temples, his hands steady as they manipulated controls that Jake recognized despite never having seen them before. The vision showed him designing engines like the one Before him, working alongside beings he didn't recognize, but somehow knew were allies. Jake, his older self, said, looking directly at him through the holographic display. "You can see me, can't you? The temporal resonance is stronger than we calculated." Jake's mouth moved soundlessly. How could his older self be aware of him? How was any of this possible? "Listen carefully," the older Jake continued, his voice urgent. "The being who brought you this engine is not what it appears to be. It's part of a faction that wants to prevent humanity from developing temporal technology. They've traveled back to stop us before we can threaten their timeline." The images shifted, showing Jake's scenes of a war fought across time itself. He saw fleets of human ships engaging alien vessels in battles that spanned multiple realities. He saw cities rising and falling in moments as the combatants rewrote history to gain tactical advantages. And through it all, he saw himself at the center of it, the inventor of the technology that made it all possible. "The engine you're repairing isn't just a propulsion system," older Jake explained. "It's a temporal displacement device capable of moving matter and energy through time as well as space. We developed it as a response to an alien species that was using similar technology to raid our past, stealing resources and knowledge to prevent their own civilization's collapse." Jake found his voice. "This is insane. I'm just a mechanic. I fix broken engines. I don't invent world-changing technology." "You're more than you know," his older self replied with a sad smile. "In about 6 months, you'll discover an anomaly in a quantum drive you're repairing. That discovery will lead you to the theoretical framework for temporal manipulation. But if that engine you're working on now is completed and returned to its owners, they'll use it to prevent that discovery from ever happening." The holographic display flickered, and Jake could see his older self struggling to maintain the connection. The blood activation was intentional. Older Jake continued, "I designed the engine to respond only to our genetic signature, but the entity that hired you has found a way around that safeguard. You have to stop them, Jake. The future of humanity depends on it." Before Jake could respond, the workshop's blast door exploded inward. The cloaked figure from before stepped through the smoke and debris, but now its true nature was revealed. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, with elongated limbs and skin that shifted between transparency and opacity. Its face was a disturbing amalgamation of features from dozens of different species, as if it had been assembled from spare parts. "Foolish child," the entity hissed, its voice now carrying harmonics that made Jake's teeth ache. "You have activated protocols you do not understand. The temporal link must be severed before further contamination occurs." Jake backed away as the creature advanced, its form shifting and flowing like liquid. "You lied to me," he said, his hand still bleeding freely. "This isn't your engine at all." "Deception is a tool of survival," the entity replied, raising one elongated arm. Jake could see weapons forming within its flesh, organic mechanisms that pulsed with lethal energy. "Your species will develop technologies that threaten the stability of time itself. We cannot allow that future to exist." The creature fired, and Jake threw himself behind the massive engine as energy bolts seared the air where he had been standing. The workshop filled with the smell of ozone and melted metal as the alien weapon carved through his equipment like it was made of paper. "The repair is nearly complete," the entity called out, its voice eerily calm despite the violence. "Once the temporal cores are properly aligned, we will use this device to travel back to the moment of your birth and ensure your elimination. The timeline will be preserved, and our species will endure." Jake pressed himself against the engine, feeling its warm metal surface pulse with contained energy. The holographic display was still active, showing his older self frantically working at some kind of control panel. Their eyes met across time, and Jake saw recognition pass between them. "Now, Jake," his older self shouted. "The resonance cascade is building. You have to make the choice now, or there won't be a future left to save." Jake looked at his bleeding hand, then at the engine's activation panel. He understood what his older self was asking him to do, and the magnitude of the decision terrified him. But as another energy bolt passed close enough to singe his hair, he realized he was out of options. The young mechanic pressed his palm against the central control crystal, feeling his blood seep into its molecular structure. The engine's hum rose to a roar, and reality began to fracture around him as Part 1 came to its explosive conclusion. The future's echo. World exploded into chaos as Jake's blood fully integrated with the alien engine's temporal core. Reality twisted and bent around him like heated metal, showing him glimpses of what was, what could be, and what must never come to pass. Through the temporal storm, he could hear the alien entity screaming in frequencies that made his bones ache. Its carefully laid plans, cracking like glass. Jake felt himself being pulled in multiple directions at once as the engine's temporal fields activated. For a terrifying moment, he existed in dozens of different timelines simultaneously. In one, he was an old man dying peacefully in his sleep. In another, he was a child who never made it past his 5th birthday. In yet another, he was someone else entirely, a stranger wearing his face, but living a completely different life. But through all the chaos, one timeline remained constant, the path that led him to this moment. Bleeding in his workshop while an alien assassin tried to erase humanity's future. That timeline felt more real than the others, more solid, as if it were the foundation upon which all the other possibilities were built. "The cascade is stabilizing," his older self called out from the holographic display, which was now flickering wildly as temporal energies interfered with its projection. "Jake, you need to get out of there. The entity can't control the engine once it's fully activated, but it will try to destroy everything rather than accept failure." Jake looked around his workshop, seeing it now through multiple temporal layers. In some versions, it was pristine and new. In others, it was ancient and abandoned. But in the timeline that mattered most, it was about to become a battlefield that would determine the fate of 2 species. The alien entity had backed away from the temporally active engine, its form shifting more rapidly as it tried to adapt to the changing reality around them. "You understand nothing of what you have done," it hissed, its voice now coming from several directions at once. "The temporal cascade will consume this entire sector of space. Billions will die because of your ignorance." "Then help me stop it," Jake called out, surprising himself with his calm tone. Despite the chaos around him, he felt oddly centered, as if the temporal connection to his older self was lending him wisdom and experience he hadn't earned yet. "You said your species is dying. Maybe there's another way." The entity's form solidified slightly, and Jake could see what might have been confusion in its alien features. "Another way. The calculations are absolute. Either your species develops temporal technology and destroys the stability of the space-time continuum, or we prevent that development and preserve the existing order. There is no third option." "There's always a third option," Jake replied, remembering something his father had told him years ago when he was struggling with a particularly difficult repair. "Sometimes you can't fix what's broken, but you can build something better from the pieces." Through the holographic display, Jake's older self nodded approvingly. "Show it the data files," older Jake said. "The complete timeline analysis we developed in the 34th iteration. Maybe understanding the full scope will change its perspective." Jake pressed his palm more firmly against the engine's control surface, feeling the machine's vast intelligence merge with his consciousness. Suddenly, he could see the temporal war from every angle, understand the desperate calculations that had driven both species to this point. The alien entity's race was indeed dying, their home system slowly being consumed by a cosmic phenomenon they couldn't prevent. They had developed temporal technology as a last resort, hoping to prevent the catastrophe that doomed them, but their interference in Earth's timeline had created the very instability they feared. Humanity's development of temporal engines was a response to alien raids on their past, not the original cause of the crisis. The two species were locked in a causal loop, each one's actions creating the need for the other's response. "Do you see it now?" Jake asked, sharing the temporal data with the entity through the engine's quantum field. "We're not enemies. We're both trying to solve the same problem, but we're approaching it from opposite ends of time." The alien entity's form flickered as it processed the information. For a moment, Jake thought it might attack again, but instead, it began to shrink, pulling its scattered essence back into a more compact shape. When the transformation was complete, it stood barely taller than Jake himself, its features settling into something almost human-like. "The calculations," it whispered, its voice now carrying tones of wonder rather than hostility. "We never considered the recursive nature of the temporal interference. Our attempts to prevent the cascade were actually causing it." "The engine you brought me to repair," Jake said, understanding dawning. "It's not from your timeline at all, is it? It's from one of the failed iterations where the cascade destroyed everything." The entity nodded slowly. "We found it drifting in a temporal dead zone, a fragment of a universe that no longer exists. We thought it was your technology, proof that humanity would develop temporal weapons. But if the cascade is recursive, then it could be from your future as much as ours," Jake finished. "The technology that destroys both our species, created by the conflict between us." Through the holographic display, Jake's older self smiled with satisfaction. "Now you're beginning to understand the true scope of the problem. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Jake looked at the alien entity, seeing it now, not as an enemy, but as a fellow victim of circumstance. What if we broke the loop? Instead of fighting each other across time, what if we worked together to prevent the cascade from ever starting? "Impossible," the entity replied, but its tone suggested it wanted to be convinced otherwise. "The temporal mechanics are too complex, too many variables, too many potential points of failure. That's why we need each other," Jake said, his confidence growing as the plan formed in his mind. "Your species has the mathematical models and the long-term perspective. Humans have the adaptability and the willingness to take risks. Together, we might be able to find a solution that neither of us could discover alone." The temporal engine around them pulsed with increasing intensity, its crystalline chambers glowing brighter as more possibilities opened up. Jake could feel the machine responding to his intentions, its quantum processors calculating thousands of potential futures simultaneously. But unlike before, these weren't contradictory timelines, fighting for dominance. They were collaborative possibilities. Futures where both species survived and thrived. "There is risk," the entity warned. "If we combine our technologies incorrectly, we could accelerate the cascade instead of preventing it. The margin for error is microscopic. Then we'd better not make any errors, Jake said with a grin that reminded him of his older self. I didn't become the best mechanic on this station by playing it safe. The entity's form rippled with what might have been amusement. Your species' tendency toward reckless optimism may be exactly what this situation requires. Very well, Jake Torres. I will share our temporal mathematics with you, and you will share your intuitive understanding of quantum mechanics with us. One condition, Jake said, his expression growing serious. I want to know your real name. If we're going to save both our species, we should at least know who we're working with. The entity's form shifted slightly, taking on features that were somehow both more alien and more familiar at the same time. I am called Echoing Across the Void by my people, though that is more of a description than what you would consider. A name, you may call me Echo. Nice to meet you, Echo, Jake said, extending his uninjured hand. Now let's figure out how to save the universe. The next several hours passed in a blur of intense collaboration. Echo shared its species' advanced temporal mathematics, while Jake contributed his intuitive understanding of quantum mechanics and his experience with improvised engineering solutions. The temporal engine served as both their laboratory and their canvas, its vast processing power allowing them to test theoretical models in real time. Jake's older self remained connected through the holographic display, providing guidance and warning them away from the most dangerous possibilities. It was strange, working alongside a future version of himself, but Jake found the experience oddly comforting. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he would have the wisdom and experience to face them. As their understanding deepened, the solution began to take shape. The key was not to prevent either species from developing temporal technology, but to ensure they developed it together, sharing the risks and the benefits from the very beginning. Instead of two competing technologies creating destructive interference, they would create one unified system that was inherently stable. The implementation would require sacrifice, Echo warned as they finalized their calculations. One of us must return to the beginning point and ensure the collaborative timeline takes precedence over all others. That person will retain memories of this timeline, but they will be the only one who remembers how close we came to mutual annihilation. Jake looked at his older self in the holographic display, seeing the weight of years and accumulated wisdom in those familiar eyes. It has to be me, doesn't it? I'm the one who's already connected to the engine. Through my DNA, I'm the only one who can make the sacrifice without disrupting the entire timeline. His older self nodded sadly. The loop must be closed, Jake. You'll go back to the moment just before Echo first contacted you. But this time, you'll know what you're really looking at. You'll understand the true purpose of the engine, and you'll be able to guide both species toward cooperation instead of conflict. What about my life? Here, Jake asked, looking around his workshop with new eyes. My friends, my future, everything I've worked for. It will still exist, Echo assured him, its voice gentle. But it will be better. The collaborative timeline we're creating will eliminate the need for the temporal war. Your species will develop more slowly but more safely, and mine will find the help we need to save our homeworld. Everyone wins. Jake took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. It was a lot to ask of a 19-year-old mechanic, but then again, he wasn't just that anymore. The temporal connection had given him knowledge and perspective far beyond his years. He was ready for this. One last question, Jake said, as he prepared to activate the temporal displacement sequence. How will I know what to do when I get back there? How will I convince myself to trust Echo instead of being suspicious? His older self smiled, reaching into his pocket and producing a small device that Jake recognized as his own personal toolkit. But modified with technology he didn't understand. This will help you remember. When you wake up in the past, you'll find this on your workbench. The moment you touch it, all your memories of this timeline will return. Jake nodded, understanding. It was elegant in its simplicity, a closed loop that ensured its own completion. He placed his hands on the temporal engine's control surface one final time, feeling its vast power respond to his intentions. "Thank you," he said to Echo, "for trusting me, for working with me instead of fighting me. I won't let either of our species down." "Thank you, Jake Torres," Echo replied, "for showing us that cooperation is stronger than conflict, and that the future belongs to those who build it together." The temporal engine roared to life, its crystalline chambers blazing with captured starlight. Jake felt reality fold around him once again, but this time it was controlled, purposeful. He was not being scattered across multiple timelines, but carefully positioned at the exact moment where he could make the greatest difference. As the light faded and Jake found himself back in his workshop 3 days ago, he saw the modified toolkit on his workbench exactly as promised. The moment his fingers touched its familiar surface, all his memories returned in a rush. He knew what was coming, knew what he had to do, and knew that the future of two species depended on his ability to turn a potential enemy into humanity's greatest ally. The blast door chimed, announcing a visitor. Jake smiled as he looked up, seeing the cloaked figure that he now knew was Echo approaching his workshop. This time, there would be no deception, no hidden agendas, and no temporal war. This time, they would build something better together. "You are Jake Torres, the mechanic," Echo said, using the same words as before, but with a subtle difference in tone that only Jake could detect. "Yes," Jake replied, setting down his tools and turning to face his visitor with a welcoming smile. "And you'll hear about the engine that's going to change everything. Come in, Echo. We have a lot of work to do, and all the time in the world to do it right." As the two unlikely allies began their collaboration, Jake felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had lived through one of the most dangerous moments in galactic history, and emerged not as a conqueror or victim, but as a bridge between species. The temporal war would never happen, the cascade would never begin, and both humanity and Echo's people would have the chance to build a better future together. The young mechanic, who had started this journey as someone just trying to pay his rent, had become something much greater, the architect of a new age of cooperation across the stars. And in the end, that was exactly what the universe needed.